In 2017, on New Year's Eve, I had a grand mal seizure on the turnpike coming home from Pennsylvania, and I went to the ER and did some testing, and I was diagnosed with epilepsy. Then I transitioned medications in April and had April of 2018 and had another seizure 3 days after. And after changing medications, I have had absence seizures and myoclonic seizures since then while being on medications. So we're still trying to figure out what those are, but yeah. As I had already said, my epileptic journey started around New Year's of 2017, and since then I have had many seizures, and we thought they were controlled for a long time, and I was on Kepro, which was working very well, but then suddenly I went to a new epileptologist, and he discovered that the medication my levels were changing, and it wasn't quite working all the way, so he put me on a new medication after doing many tests on my brain and doing a week-long EEG. And so he found out where the seizures were happening and gave me a hospital medication to keep me stable and one to start taking. And I was supposed to wean off the one from the hospital since it's a very strong and dangerous medication, and start increasing the dose of the other. But we saw that doctor again, and I had to increase the one from the hospital because that was the only one that was keeping me stable. So I go back in June to change my meds again. But since I had interviewed last time, I've had 2 seizures. One in the hospital, which lasted over 2 hours and would have lasted longer had the doctors not stopped it with many sedatives. And one I had in a car after a school dance. One had convulsions, the other didn't have anything really. It was just me acting out of sorts and not being aware of my surroundings at all. So I've had very different seizures since my last time, and I've started having silent seizures and all sorts of things that I hadn't had before, like seizures in my sleep I've had, and just things like that. And so I felt like it was necessary to redo my interview because so much has changed, and I think it's good that people know that epilepsy can change over time, because I used to just have to watch out for lights and hyperventilating, which are things you can avoid. It's hard, but you can avoid them. But stress and fatigue and exhaustion and things like that are harder to avoid, and I didn't think triggers could ever change, and I didn't think my types of seizures would ever change or that I'd have to change meds again. But we've gone through now 4 different medications, and I've had so many types of seizures, and my triggers have changed entirely. So I think it's good that people can know that epilepsy is an ever-changing thing sometimes, and some people may not find answers as easily as others.
Well, my sister had her first seizure several years ago, maybe 11 years ago, and we didn't really think anything of that after the fact. But then 11 years later, on New Year's Eve, we were driving home from Pennsylvania in the car, and we had just stopped for food. She had just woken up from a nap and had started eating, and then I looked over and she had a weird look on her face, and I was going to tell her to stop making that face, and then suddenly I saw that she no longer had control of her body. And I've never seen anybody have a seizure before, but there was just something like almost human inside of me that told me Mary is having a seizure. And so I was the one sitting next to her, and I called up to my dad and stepmom, like, Mary is having a seizure. And from there, everything kind of went into action. We pulled off the side of the road, called 911, then an ambulance showed up, and the next several hours were spent in the hospital. But from then, we spent the next year dealing with other seizure activity and migraines and trying to figure out what medications were good. I know she has gone to countless appointments with neurologists and other doctors, and most recently She had an extended hospital stay at the Cleveland Clinic in the epilepsy unit, in which they were going to study her brain on medicine, off medicine, and then during a seizure. So they were basically trying to get her to have a seizure. And she did have a seizure, which then ended up not stopping, so they had to take her to the ICU. And that was a whole experience, but we're hoping now that she's on some more effective medicine based on the data that they collected from that test. And yeah, now we're just gonna see what develops from that.
So when my sister was 5 years old, she had a seizure at a family gathering, and at the time we thought it was a febrile seizure. And then about a year ago, she had a grand mal seizure when we were driving on the highway. She just kind of was like in the middle of eating and just froze up. And so we pulled over and the ambulance came. It was the first time I had really seen a grand mal seizure before. Because the one that she had when she was little, I didn't really try to stay out of the way. And so it was time when the whole family had to work together and just waiting and seeing what was going on and why it happened. And then a couple months later, she was in between medications and driving with a friend. Her friend was driving, she was not. And she had a seizure then. And that time, like, just like the instinct hit in of like having to run and speed to where she was and get to the hospital to see what was going on. And then last month, she was taken to Cleveland Clinic for an observation. And so she was supposed to be in the hospital 5 days. She ended up having a seizure after they took her off her medications, and it was over an hour long. And so they had to give her sedatives to take her out of the seizure, and that put her in the ICU. And then as she was coming out of that, they gave her new medications and just did an MRI this week to try to figure out what's going on. So all that to say, it's been a year and we still don't know what's causing her epilepsy and what's in store for the future.
Well, it started when my friend Mary started having seizures. What was it, about 2 years ago? And she was on her way back from Pennsylvania, and then all of a sudden I just saw this picture of her in the hospital, and I was like, oh, that's probably not a good thing. And so I texted her about it, and she was just scared, and they didn't know what was going on. And when she came back, she told me she had a seizure, and that they had diagnosed her as epileptic. And so later that year, we were driving down to the Players Guild in Canton, and she had a seizure in my front seat in my car, and that was intense. I didn't know what to do, and obviously she was passed out, so I couldn't even ask her what I needed to do, so I just called her mom, and then I called the ambulance, and they picked her up, and it was an intense emotional journey. It was a lot of praying and just asking, why is this happening to someone as good as Mary? And then I just have to believe that something good's gonna come out of this, and that someday she'll be able to use this to help other people like she's doing now, and just everything will turn out good in the end.
My epileptic journey started when I was after football practice, and I felt a little bit tired, so I went to go into my room and take a nap. Next thing I know, it's like a day later and I'm in the emergency room, and my parents were telling me all these things that have fleeted my memory, just sort of like a dream. And the thing with seizures is that you don't really remember like the time after really much. So anyways, I got put into a room and I stayed there for a couple of days, and then I went to school, and then next thing you know, it stopped for a little bit. It stopped for a little bit, and then I thought I was fine, so I stopped taking my medication. Then I had another one. So, and I've been taking my medication ever since.
From my perspective, it's three distinct events, and the way we've dealt with it to get him to where he is today. That's how I view the journey. There's a cause and effect to everything, and it's simply focused on helping him get back to his normal.
It's probably the hardest thing to do as a parent, to watch and to know that your child is dealing with something you can do nothing about.
When I was 12 years old, I had my first seizure at my birthday party, and then 1 week later I was at another birthday party and I drowned. I had a seizure and I drowned. I was under for 4 minutes. And then after that I've just been in and out of the hospital. I had 2 heart surgeries because they had thought it was my heart, because the first time I was playing tag and the second time I was swimming. So they put a heart monitor in, and then they realized it wasn't my heart. So they took that out, and then about, I want to say maybe a year later, they did a test and they figured out it was my brain. They did those weekly tests that you'd, like, the week long. They did, like, I did 3 or 4 of those, and they figured out, like, that it was my brain. So they did a test, and so I went in for surgery, and they took a large piece of my skull out for 9 days. And I sat, like, for 9 days without part of my skull, but they had put these probes in there. It's right here is where it's at. They put these probes all in here so they could monitor what was going on. And so people would come in every couple of days with a computer, and they'd make me do things. I could read backwards, read upside down, and they found out, they pinpointed exactly where it was, and they took about a golf ball size of my brain out. And then a couple weeks go by and I had another seizure, but now it's just my arm, and it only lasts a couple of minutes. And then so they went back in, and now I'm missing about tennis ball size of my brain, but I'm about 3 years seizure free. I'm still on medications though, but yeah.
Came out of nowhere. No history of it. The first one was last September. Out of the clear blue sky, we went for a short walk, turned around to come back. I said, hang on a minute, I felt dizzy, and that's the last thing I remember. And my most recent episode was in January, early part of January. Same thing, no warning signs, not much of anything, just kind of felt lightheaded and don't remember a thing except waking up and coming to in the emergency room.
Well, most recent is my husband. I think just at 63 to have him have a seizure, I just in shock, serious shock. I didn't understand what was happening. He didn't even go down. He literally fell down like a tower, like a tree, falls down and hits the cement and busted his head open and bled. It was awful, and I never ever expected something like that ever.
I had a very bad car accident when I was 16 years old, and it caused a traumatic brain injury that now affects me with seizures. They started about 2 years after the accident, when I had my first severe epilepsy attack. I was actually out shooting pool with my little sister, and I just went out. They have said I have a post-traumatic brain injury with a certain dead spot in my brain that affects my emotions and also short circuits my brain once in a while. So mostly now, all of my seizures are absent seizures, which annoys my children greatly because they'll be sitting on the couch yelling, "Mom, Mom, Mom, Mom," and I'm just gone and staring at the TV or whatever it is I'm staring at. And then I come back and they're like, oh, she's back. And we move on with our day. I do feel most of my seizures prior to them happening. I will have symptoms, headache, my eye will twitch, my fingers will twitch. And that's usually when I know it's going to be a bad day. Stay put, don't go far, that I'm at more risk on those days.
I know that I'm pretty sure she started having seizures after the accident, and that her seizures are not convulsing. She usually, if we're standing next to her while she's having a seizure, she'll just stare in one place for a moment of time, and she won't understand what we're saying or hear us, and she'll just stare. And then we're like, oh, good Lord. And we turn around, she's like, wait, what? And then it's usually fine. We go on with our day.
It all started, it was almost a year ago today. I was in Fairlawn with my mom. We were visiting people, and I got back into the car. It was like late at night, and I started blacking out. And I was like trying to tell myself like it's okay, like I don't know what was happening. And then all of a sudden I blacked out, and woke up and I was shaking. And then the paramedics came, and they basically told me I was faking. They didn't believe me. They thought I was on drugs. So I went to the hospital. They told me like what happened, like you're having seizures, but it was an adult hospital and I wasn't 18 at the time, so I had to go back. Went back to the hospital, told I was faking again, and then finally I found my neurologist, and he quickly found out that it was a nerve disorder. So it all started, I think it was my freshman year. We were at dinner, she kept saying she couldn't see out of her right eye, so my dad just told her to lay down and just relax. But all of a sudden she came out of her room. You could tell like there was something wrong in her eye. She couldn't see anything, and so I called my dad. He's a paramedic, so he'd know what to do probably. So we call him, and he's like, I can't leave my brother. He was giving him a bath. So like we were crossing paths on the steps so I could go to my brother, and all you hear is just, it was my mom. She fell and she started having a seizure, and yeah.
Well, it started when I was in 3rd grade, and I would just have like frequent blankouts while like being in school, talking to friends, and then suddenly it happened at a softball practice, and my coach realized what was going on and told my mom. So then a couple months later, I had to go to the hospital to like get checked out, and then at first they just diagnosed me with absent seizures. And then a couple years later, I had to go back for an appointment, and then they diagnosed me with epilepsy.
Well, my journey started around, I want to say, sophomore year of high school. And I had a seizure the night before a soccer tournament. And basically how my seizure went was I would first be really tired, and I'd say I'd want to go to bed. And then I would try to go to bed and I wouldn't be able to fall asleep. And then I would go back downstairs. My vision would be blurry with my glasses on, and my limbs were numb, and I would try to talk, but I could not move my mouth, and my mom would, of course, freak out. And she tried to give me water, and I couldn't drink it because my jaw and my mouth would just not work. And then after a while, sooner or later, I would throw up, basically, and then it would be over. And that was one of the first times, and it only happened one other time around Christmas time when we had gotten home from Christmas shopping.
Well, it all started when I was 8. So I found out that I had absent seizures when I was 8 years old. So I wasn't diagnosed as an epileptic right away. So I found out I had absent seizures. And then I think around 2015, I had my first epileptic seizure in the driveway of my house. I was getting ready to go to school and I couldn't tie my shoes because my hands were going like this. And then my mom was taking me to the car without any shoes on just to go to the hospital, and I had a seizure right in the I remember waking up in the hospital and I was just like, where am I? And then and then I had another one a month later at my friend's house. So then I was diagnosed as an epileptic and put on new medication. It's been a wild ride because your medicine changes constantly, and lots of doctor visits, but for the most part it's been stable for the last couple of years.
It started when I was like 3 or 4. So, I had my first one because of like fevers that I used to get, like high temperature fevers. And I usually, I just shake and like twitch a lot, so I don't really like have like my whole body shaking or I freak out. Mine's kind of just like my brain nerves kind of attack each other when I'm sleeping. And it only happens when I'm sleeping. So, yeah.
So when I was younger, it started off with me diving on the couches or the floor, and I would kind of toss and turn. And my family didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't know what it was. And when I saw the doctor thought I was faking them for attention. So within my first month of starting to have them, I actually spent a week on the psych floor at Children's Hospital because they thought I was wanting attention for it, until I actually had one in front of the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, this kid's having seizures." So I don't think that's something I've ever heard someone make up. But so they started putting me on medication then, and throughout my school year, I would have, once in a while, have one in school at my desk or something. And they eventually started paying for. I went to Norton High School, Norton, Ohio. They eventually decided to pay for my homeschooling because they said that I was an insurance risk because I could hurt myself or others having a seizure at school. So that kind of changed my social life a lot because I started staying at home and not being in class with a bunch of people. Finished high school, come 18, moved. My parents separated. I moved with my father. Seizures have always been a part of my life. Unfortunately, you're not supposed to drive with having seizures, but I always did because I didn't care. And the majority of my seizures do happen at night in my sleep. Did happen at night. We'll get to that part. Fast forward through my early 20s. I'm 30, by the way, almost 31. And I was still seeing my childhood doctor. He's for youth kids, and I saw him up until the age of 27. I'm pretty sure I was the oldest one. His name was Dr. Telekaraskalev, but everyone called him Dr. TK. And he gave me a referral to a Russian doctor. I don't remember her name, but I did not like her after one visit. So I asked for another referral and was sent to Cleveland Clinic, Akron General, where I met a Dr. Fessler, and she said that I would be a good candidate for open craniotomy. So they did a few tests on me throughout a year. I had different blood tests and sleep studies and EEGs and all these wires glued to my head. And at one point, they even stuck a needle in through my skull to insert it right on the brain. That was kind of scary, but it was all for the better. And they finally decided that actually the doctors themselves, whoever, there's a whole board of people that review the cases, these cases in particular. A board of people used a new study program, whatever. They ran my CAT scan and MRIs through. So the naked eye could not see the lesion, but I had a lesion on my brain in the front left temporal lobe, I guess that area is called. They decided it over like the next month that they wanted to remove it because they think that was the cause of the seizures. So June 21st, 2018, I had brain surgery where they opened my skull. You can't see it because of my hair, but I do have a scar across my forehead here. And they removed a piece of my brain about the size of the tip of your pinky. amazing enough, I was only in Cleveland Clinic for 4 days. You would think brain surgery would be like, hey, you need to take it easy. No, I was ready to go. Was not enjoying my stay. But they did keep me on my meds, so I still take 3 medications. They're slowly weaning me off. It's been 8 months now. And I have yet to have another seizure since. And before the surgery, I was having them probably 2 or 3 times a month in my sleep. So I noticed right away that there was a change. I am still on my meds, so who knows? Cross our fingers, everything's good. But it is still a scary thought that I'm thinking and hoping I can move on with my life and put that epilepsy seizures in the past, because it is a burden to carry with you, because you never know when you can have one out in public, hurt yourself, whatever. So hopefully they will be gone from my life and I can stop taking all these meds and who knows, maybe become Dr. President someday.
I don't remember most of it because it was when I was younger. I remember it did scare me when I was little, and I was lucky to have doctors that helped, and I got cured from it.
Well, my sister actually had a seizure while we were on vacation, probably back in 2012, 2013, and I was younger at the time, but we had separate hotel rooms for my parents, so it was my sister and I and then my other parent, and we just went to bed after a fun day, and all I know is that I woke up because I heard this weird noise, and she started shaking really bad, and I could tell she wasn't conscious, and I was like, is she dreaming? But then I realized I've never seen anyone shake like this before, convulse. So I went and I woke her up and I started shaking her to get her awake, and she started actually bleeding from the mouth. And so I was like, okay, now I need to go get help. So I ran, got my parents, and the medic, we were in the Dominican Republic, so they came and took her for about 2 days, ran some tests, and we found out that she was actually, she actually has had mini seizures in her sleep. They've only been during her sleep. And we never knew, except that she kept complaining that she bit her mouth, her gums, while she was sleeping. And we didn't think anything of it. We're like, okay, but it was really raw. And so now we finally have some answers, and she has been on medication ever since and has not had one for, 7 years now.
So right around Christmas time is when we started to see him have a little bit of quirks around, and we thought maybe it's just him being 5. And then we our son's preschool teacher mentioned something to us, and so we decided to kind of explore avenues at the pediatrician through Akron Children's, and they had diagnosed us with what they call absence seizures, and we didn't know a thing about them. We had no idea what they were like, and so from there the doctor ordered an EEG, and he said, you'll probably never see convulsive seizures. And the next morning he had one on the middle of the kitchen floor, and stopped breathing for a minute or two, and it was terrifying. And 3 or 4 days go by, and he ended up being transported by ambulance to the hospital, and we spent 3 days at Akron Children's doing tests, and long story short, the general diagnosis was epilepsy. So yeah, so we're kind of working through the ebbs and flows of everything with it.
When he was 16, he was in a car accident. He was driving, and no one else was in his car. He had stopped to make a left-hand turn and was waiting for the traffic to go by so he could turn, and somebody rear-ended him. They tried to miss him, so they hit him in the corner, and that pushed him in front of the oncoming car. So he was hit by two separate directions. What that did, obviously the other people were probably afraid too, but what it did to him was, because he was shaken like that, it gave him what they called diffuse closed head injury, which means that instead of like if somebody falls on their head or gets hit on the head, they have a large injury in one part of their brain. What happened to him was he had whole lots of tears throughout his brain. So it was not localized. It was like throughout. There were places that were hurt more than others, but for the most part, he didn't have external injuries. He had tears within his brain. He was in the hospital and then was moved to a rehab hospital for about March, April, May, June, July, almost 6 months. He was between the hospital and inpatient rehab. He was unconscious for a lot of that time. Eventually he did come out of his coma, and he had a lot of physical therapy and other therapies to help him. He has serious short-term memory issues and balance and tightness on one side of his body, which is called spasticity. Wants to tighten up. So he's to the point now where he can walk with a walker. He's unsteady though. His judgment isn't great in terms of whether or not he's going to fall or whether or not doing a certain thing will make him fall. So he mostly uses a wheelchair to get around because that's safer for him. He doesn't have to worry about balance. That's really what changed his life. And I have to say, it was truly an accident. He wasn't doing anything wrong. The people that hit him weren't speeding or drinking obviously they rear-ended him, but it was just an accident. Yes. Well, he's not, at the time when he was in the hospital and we didn't know if he was going to get better or not, or if he did live or whatever, what condition he would be in. And a lot of people never make it to the point where they're functional again at all. Some people are in a permanent coma. Can't do anything, can't communicate, can't go anywhere. He doesn't have any paralysis. His movement is restricted by the brain controls your voluntary movement, and his brain injury is what makes it hard for him to move. He does not have a spinal cord injury. He's not paralyzed. His comprehension is not impaired. His ability to function is because of his memory and his judgment, which is a direct effect of the part of the places that his brain was injured. But there are so many people, there are people that can't move, people who can't speak. Do I want him to be able to go back to college and get married and have a family if that's what he wants to do? Oh, that'd be cool, but wishing for things that aren't there, there's no point in it, We'll just have to wait and see what happens, and you can try to have a positive attitude and do your best, or you can be miserable and angry, and it's not going to change the situation at all. So I don't want to spend all my time being miserable and unhappy. Okay. We woke up one night to strange sounds coming from his bedroom, and we had never seen a seizure before. We never had any idea that he would have a seizure. He had never had one before. We just sort of thought, well, maybe that's what this is, and we called 911. So then, of course, he had to have tests and so forth. And he did, in fact, have a seizure. The doctor, he was under the care of a neurologist because of a traumatic brain injury that he had 3 years before that. And the doctor said that his seizure was caused by damage to his brain from the accident that he'd had. We had no idea that 3 years later he could suddenly have a seizure. He had never had one before, but I guess that's not rare. So he had seizures every so often. His seizures are very full body and violent. They're grand mal seizures. Fortunately, he mostly had them when he was either in bed or in his wheelchair. And so the danger of him getting injured during the seizure was lessened because of that, because he was more in a controlled environment, wasn't driving, wasn't standing. They tried different medications to control his seizures. The first one made him very lethargic. In the end, it didn't control his seizures anyways, but I finally took him to the doctor and said, I don't want to whine about this, but he's not hasn't had a seizure really, but he's not having anything else either because he's so out of it. And the doctor said, no, that's not good. We don't want that either. And then he had a seizure while he was on those meds, so they changed it anyway. Took him about a year of trying different medications and then trying combinations of medications after one alone didn't work, before they found one that controlled his seizures. So he's been without any seizures now for 17 years. Ever since they put him on the 2 medications he's on now, he has not had a seizure. That doesn't mean he can't or won't. I guess it's very common, especially if people get very stressed or very sick or, certain combinations of situations occur. He could very well have another seizure. But the medication appears to be controlling it very well at this time.
Yeah, I don't want to get too emotional, but he is just, we've been so blessed with God being able to bring us through this whole process, and I can't speak enough about that, just being able to walk through this arm in arm with God and realizing that he's carrying us too, knowing that we're hopeful that he'll eventually outgrow this. And he's still our little Jonathan, but he likes to tell me that his name is actually John now because that's what his friends call him. So, but he is a trooper through this whole thing, and we love him through and through for that. So,
just understand the condition, as much education as the family can get, because there's varying degrees of epilepsy. There's varying degrees of intensity. I would say learn what your loved one has, learn what to expect, and don't panic. It's not the end of the world. Stay calm. That's a big part of it. And be understanding.
I mean, just keep pushing. Like, I'm not gonna lie. There's nothing easy about it, and like you're always scared it's gonna happen again. And you're gonna have another seizure. You just gotta keep pushing through it. Be strong, and it gets better. I promise.